Right, what is going on, everyone? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics back on the Fanalytics channel with another top 10 video. In this one, we are going over the top 10 Copper Age comic books. I did numbers 10 through 6 over on my channel, and here on the Fanalytics channel, we are going to be doing numbers 5 through 1, as well as looking at all of the consolidated information together. So you don't necessarily have to go and watch the one on my channel first. You can start here and we'll go over everything together. Now, if you are coming over from my channel, I mentioned over there, I'm doing a giveaway here as well as part of this combined video. And so if you want a chance to win the giveaway in this one, and like I said on my channel, it is a lower grade book, but it's still a cool Silver Age key. This is X-Men number 7. It's got a piece missing out of the cover, but this is the second appearance of the Blob. So a pretty significant Silver Age key for the X-Men, for Marvel in general. So if you want a chance to win this book, you have to like the video, subscribe to the Fanalytics channel, and leave a comment with hashtag Fanalytics. I will put the little hashtag down there, and you will be entered for a chance to win that book. And then I will reach out to you when we eventually pick that winner and get your information and send out that book to you. Now, just be aware that sometimes there are scammers out there with these giveaways. It will be coming either from me, a message directly from me, or from the Fanalytics channel itself. It's not going to be from some other channel. So just keep an eye out for that. Now, for the reason why we're all here to talk about those top 10 Copper Age comics, I talked about this on my channel as well. It can be difficult with some of these because some of the big Copper Age comics are relatively rare, and so there's not enough sales data to really use them for this type of analysis. So the books like Bone number 1, The Crow number 1, Albedo number 2, those ones, even though they are big Copper Age comics, don't get me wrong, I did not use those specifically for this because they just don't sell often enough to get any real meaningful sales trend data. But we still have some awesome books here, especially if you've seen what we had on the other channel as well. We've got even bigger ones coming up on this. So let's get into those top 5 from this list. All right, so now let's talk about these books. Now, before I get into these, I went over the information that's on this page in my video, but if you're just starting right here and you don't have that information, I'll give a little bit of background about what I'm providing on this page, what I'm talking about here. So in my video, I went over issues 10 through 6. We're going to go over 5 through 1 here, and then we're going to go over all of them combined together at the end. Now you can see I've got a little bit of information on this page. On the top here, we have the CGC census data. What I do is I pick the most common grade in the CGC census for that book. The reason I do that is that it makes sure that I have the highest chance of having sales data that I can use. Because if the book has more graded copies out there, it's more likely it's bought and sold at regular intervals. You can use that data across the years to determine what the trends are for pricing on this book. Then I also have some pricing information on the bottom. I have the current price. That's what the book is going for today, what people might call the fair market value. Then I have the annual return, and that's normally I'm doing from 2015 to 2020. I'll talk about this one was a little unique. That's why I've got 2 numbers there. Sometimes I'll use other time periods. And that is what that book returned long-term prior to the comic boom, prior to those big spikes in prices. Then what I'm doing is I'm taking that return and I'm extending it like the comic boom never happened. That's what I'm showing here. And that's how I'm determining if there's some upside potential, if the book is undervalued right now, if it's still overpriced based on the comic boom, if it's still too expensive, and if you want to wait. So let's get into these books now. So the first one here, we've got number 5, New Mutants, number 98. This is the first appearance of Deadpool, this Rob Liefeld cover. And most common grade for this book is a 9.6, and there are a ton of these out there. 27,082 graded copies on census with 23,450 universal copies. Those are the blue labels by CGC if you're not familiar with what I mean by universal. Now, in a 9.6, there are 7,214 copies with 6,321 universals. So there are just a ton of these books out there. And that's one of the things I've talked about why we saw such big corrections after the spikes in these books during the comic boom, because if one of these books jumps up in price 2, 3, 4 times, you have a lot of people that have that book that had it at a much cheaper price, and they'll go, hey, I want to sell it for that. And they just dump them on the market, and you get huge numbers of these books coming out and coming up for sale. And that's how you have those really big corrections back to the prices that we're at today. So in a 9.6, current price of this book is around $575. Now, the interesting thing with this book specifically is that there was a spike in prices in around 2014. My guess is maybe it was around when the Deadpool movie was announced, that Ryan Reynolds was going to be doing that Deadpool movie, because I think that came out in around 2016. And so what happened was you had this big spike in prices, and then it was just flat for a number of years. You will see that in comics quite a bit, where there's some announcement, causes a spike, it re-baselines, but then it stays flat for a while until it starts trickling back up again. And that's what we saw here. From 2015 to 2020, this book had a 0% return, which I don't think is realistic for this. Deadpool is an extremely popular character. Ryan Reynolds has made him a very popular character and more recognizable in the wider, just non-comic world as well. Because if you look at from 2005 to 2020, this book has a very strong return. And part of that is that Deadpool wasn't all that popular of a character for a while. And so you had a very strong return from 2005 to 2020, 18% year over year. So this book in 2020 was going for around $430. If you apply that 18% to that, today it would be a $705 book. Now, I don't think that 18% is probably likely to continue long term. I've generally seen that is on the very high end of what I see with most comic books. Typically 10 to 13% is often around where they go. So I think the actual result here is going to be somewhere in the middle. I don't think it's zero. This book is not going to stay flat long term. I don't think that at all. But I think that 18 is probably a little bit unrealistic, but I do think it's somewhere in the middle, which is why I do think it's relatively safe to be purchasing right now. If it did stay flat, you can see here, it would be a 25% downside risk. If it was an 18% growth, if that continued, it'd be a 22% upside potential on it. But I think it's somewhere around the middle. When you look at the actual graphs for the sales prices of this book, I think it is actually right around where it should be. So I think New Mutants 98 is a pretty safe book to pick up right now. I think there's very limited downside risk. All right, now let's move on to number 4. Not a lot of DC, but I felt like this one had to be on this list. This is Batman: The Dark Knight Returns #1. This storyline by Frank Miller effectively redefined Batman. It got a much darker character. Also, just an amazing cover. I'm not a huge Frank Miller art fan, but I do really like this cover. Something about the lightning bolt and everything just looks really great on it. Now, the most common grade for this book is a 9.6. There aren't nearly as many of these out there as there are some of the Marvel books, but there's still quite a few. We've got 5,998 total copies on Census, 4,270 universals. In a 9.6, there are 2,049 and 1,505 universals. Now, the other thing to be careful about with this book is that I believe it doesn't specifically say if it's the first or second print on the indicia on the inside of the cover. It's, I believe, just the color tone of the inside is what tells you if it is the first or second print. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that is how it is. So it can be real tricky on determining first and second print with this book. So just something to be aware of if you're buying a raw copy. Now, the current price for a 9.6 is about $290. This book from 2010 to 2020, I took a longer term view because it had a couple flat spots in it as well. So I took a longer term view from 2010 to 2020, returned 11% annually. So if we apply that to its price from 2020, which is around $210, it would make it a $290 book today, which is exactly what it's going for. So there is really no downside risk from what I can see with this book. This is a very safe book to buy right now. And so if you have been waiting to pick up this book, might be a good time to go find one. All right, let's move on to number 3. And we're getting a little more Amazing Spider-Man here. I had some Amazing Spider-Man on the 10 through 6 as well. This is issue 252, one of the most recognizable covers from this era. And this is the first appearance of the black suit. There are other issues that it's tied with, but this is recognized really as the absolute first time that it came out. I believe it was like 2 weeks before the others, or 2 or 3 weeks before the others. Also just a great cover and homage to Amazing Fantasy number 15. Now, The most common grade again here we've got is a 9.6, and you can see there are a ton of these books out there as well. 21,700 on census with 19,892 universal copies. In the 9.6, there are 4,325 with 3,955 universals. In that 9.6, this book is currently going for around $375. From 2015 to 2020, it had a 12% growth rate. This book was going for around $220 in 2020, so that would put it at $310 today. That is a downside risk of 17%. So, like I mentioned in the earlier part of this video, everything Venom got really expensive, including this book. Everything Venom related, all the black suit keys and all of that. And it just hasn't corrected enough yet, I don't think. This book got up to $885 at its peak. It's down about 58% from there, but I think it just has a little bit more to drop before it really starts to turn back up again. So if you're looking for this book, maybe you find a great deal and it's okay, but otherwise I would be a little bit more patient with it and see what happens. All right, now let's move to number 2, and we are sticking with Spider-Man again. And so with this one, we have Amazing Spider-Man number 300, first appearance of Venom, also the most homage cover of all time. I can almost guarantee that. Done by Todd McFarlane. This one is used all the time, and Venom is arguably one of Spider-Man's most popular villains. I mean, you've got some others as well. You've got Green Goblin, Doc Ock, but Venom is an extremely popular character, and he has been a constant part of the Spider-Man universe ever since his introduction back in Amazing Spider-Man. Well, technically 298 is when the first time you kind of see him or hear from him. Then you've got 299 where it's really like that Hulk 180 where he's on the last page and you see his name. And then you've got 300, which is that first full appearance of Venom. The Amazing Spider-Man 300, most common grade, is a 9.4, a little bit different than some of the others that we've talked about. I believe this is the most graded book on the CGC census. I have heard that in the past. I don't know if that's still true, but at least at one point, this was the most graded book. And at least on this list, it crushes all the other books by quite a bit. 34,533 copies graded, 27,366 universals. In a 9.4 alone, there are 5,836 with 4,614 universals. In that 9.4, this book is currently going for around $785. Prior to the comic boom from 2015 to 2020, had around a 12% growth rate. If we applied that to its 2020 price, which was $525, it would be at $740 today. That is a downside of just 6%. So unlike the other Venom books that I've talked about that seem like they still have a little ways to drop, this one is a pretty safe buy at these prices. And I think a big part of that is this one has just so many copies out there. It sells every day. And so when you have that, it's going to correct more quickly. It's going to get back to that baseline more quickly because so many copies are changing hands. And so this book to me seems like a pretty safe book at this point to start picking up again. But it was really expensive for a while. During the comic boom, in a 9.4, it peaked at $2,160, and that was in 2021. It is down 64% since then. But like I said, I feel like it is a pretty safe book to go after right now. All right, let's move on to number 1. I don't know if people wonder, maybe they thought Amazing Spider-Man 300 was going to be number 1. But number 1, for my list at least, is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 1, and we are talking about the first print here. I made sure that the image that I have up here is actually of the first print, just so I don't cause any potential confusion, because the third print looks a little bit different. The main thing, if you can see my cursor here, there's a little extra bit of blood on this T, on the T right here, and so that's how you know it's the third print. But the first and second prints, they look identical from the front. You only know the difference by going into the interior of the book. Now, what makes this one so important? It is the first appearance of the Turtles, first appearance of Shredder, first appearance of Splinter. It also kicked off a huge franchise. Some of these other books, like the Spider-Man keys, I mean, he kicked off in the Silver Age. This is one where you have this franchise starting right here, very similar to the Lady Death from Evil Army number 1, but Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are much, much bigger than the Lady Death franchise. I mean, it is huge. It is a worldwide phenomena. And so I felt like this one has to be on this list. Now, I consider this to be one of the books that kicks off that copper age. It's from 1984. It's right around, to me, when you would call the copper age kicking off. It's a very different style from that era of the Bronze Age, and so I think this could easily be one of the books that's counted for that. Typically, I believe it's the Secret Wars storyline that's used, but they both came out around similar times. But for me, this is one of the books that kicked off that copper age. Now you can see the grade is much different on this book than you have with the others. And a big part of that is that this book is so valuable in any grade. So the other books, you could see prior to the comic boom, I mean, you have a book that's worth $220 and a 9.6. So the lower grade copies aren't really worth getting graded as much. This book is so valuable in all grades that any grade is worth getting submitted. And so most common grade, 8.5. Total on census, 1,198 with 992 universals. And in 8.5, there are 149 with 123 universal copies. Now, with this book, this print count was only 3,000. So we don't know how many have been lost or destroyed over time. We don't know how many of these are resubmissions. It's hard to say for sure. But in comparison to other Copper Age books, this is a much more rare book, a much more scarce book. It's not rare if you're talking about Golden Age or, that kind of thing. But for Copper Age, for Bronze, for Modern, this is a rare book. Like I said, print count of just 3,000. Now, an 8.5, you can see here, the prices on this book are so much different than everything else we've talked about. 8.5 current price, and I had to estimate this because there wasn't a recent sale, say around $15,300. Now, I looked at two different returns on this book because from 2015 to 2020, its return was 20%. That is wild. That is a huge number. So I was like, well, I'll go look at 2005 to 2020 to see what it is. It was still 15%. Over 15 years, this book still was returning 15% year over year. This book is a beast, and it's just because it is so rare in comparison and so many people want a copy that it just commands a serious amount of money. Now, in 2020, this book was going for around $7,800. If we apply those growth rates, we get a value between $11,900 and $13,500 is what it should be going for today. So we have a downside of 22% to 12%. So yes, this one still has some room to drop. However, when you look at the growth rates, it's actually not that bad. Within 1 year, you would approximately be at these prices now. So that's one of the things that when we'll talk about these books all together, to me, this is a book that you want to keep your eye on. You want to watch it because in a year, this book could be going for $15,000 to $16,000 just based on its typical return. So definitely something where, yes, it could drop a little bit more in the short term, but longer term, it seems like it is a relatively safe buy, especially if you get it for a reasonable price, like around the price that I've got here for that quote fair market value. Because that's the thing, when someone is listing this book for sale, there's not a lot of them out there and there's a lot of demand for them. And so they're not motivated necessarily to sell it at that price. They'll probably have it listed a little bit higher. Now, to talk about where this book went, in 2021, the record for this book, the peak sale, was $30,000. And that's what we're talking about with the craziness that happened in the comic boom. This book in 2020, about a year before that record sale, this book was going for $7,800. It went up 4x, 300% in that short period of time. And so it's not a surprise that these books have corrected. But this one takes a little bit longer as well. I've talked about that with some of the other ones because it's a little bit more rare. They don't sell quite as often. And so getting down to those baseline prices again has taken a little bit longer. But this is one that, for me, I would love to own a copy of this one someday. I've owned a third print, I've owned a second print, but I have never owned a first print before. Would be awesome to own one of these someday, but don't have one yet. But we'll see. We'll see eventually. Hopefully that will pan out. But now, so we've talked about all 10 books. Let's look at them all together to see which ones you maybe want to be trying to pick up right now, which ones to watch, and which ones to avoid. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove myself from the screen so that you can see all of this information a little bit more clearly. And don't worry, I will highlight the specific rows in the tables on what I think are the potential buys, avoids, all that kind of stuff. we've got all 10 books here. I've got the issue numbers, the grades, the prices, the annual return, and what the potential up and downside is today. So first, let's take a look at those books that I think might be good to be purchasing right now, or at least are safe to buy right now. So these are the potential buys, is what I'm calling these. And there's 3 of them. First one, Batman, The Dark Knight Returns, #1. You can see there it had 0% upside or downside, meaning that the price it's at right now is what I would expect it to be at based on its typical annual return. So I think that book is a very safe book to buy. It's that standard DC where they just kind of gradually go up year after year. It's a popular book, great cover. I think that's a safe one. Then we've got New Mutants #98. Now, yes, it has that minus 25%, but that's with a 0% return moving forward, which I think is not realistic at all. Now, you could maybe say that you want to wait until after the Deadpool movie because you often get a pullback a little bit in prices following one of those movies. So that's possible. That could be something to wait for. But I think New Mutants '98 as well has gotten to the point where it is a very safe book to buy. It has some upside potential, but there's such a huge range there. I think it's likely somewhere in the middle. So that one I feel like is a very safe buy right now as well. And the last one down there that we'll talk about is X-Men #266. Same thing with New Mutants '98. I don't believe a 0% return. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, what you would often see with comic books is you'll see a spike in prices and then they're flat, spike in prices and then they're flat. And so it just had that flat period for those prior 5 years, which is why you see the 0%. But when you look at the long-term growth for this book, it was 9%, makes it so it has a 2% upside potential, which effectively means it's priced right today. And so I think it is a very safe book to pick up right now. Now let's move on to the avoids. So there are a few of them. We got 4 of them on here that I would personally avoid. Now, the rule that I've been using for what I recommend to buy, avoid, and watch is that if the annual return makes it so that it takes more than a year to get back to even with that book, like if you bought it today and it had a downside, like that first one here, Amazing Spider-Man 252. There's a downside of 17%, annual return of 12%. It would take more than a year of 12% returns to get back to the current price. And so to me, that's a book that I would avoid right now. I could buy some other things, I can wait, whatever it might be. And so I would rather just wait on anything that has more than a year to get back to even. So the first one here, Amazing Spider-Man 252. I mean, yeah, it's a huge key. It's a great book. It sells all the time. So you might catch a low sale. If that's the case, fine, go ahead and pick it up. If you find one in a 9.6 for $300, that's a great buy. But at $375, I think it still has too much room to give. Next one there is Evil Ernie #1. I think that's actually the riskiest book to buy right now. It has a 25% downside. And so I would just be patient with it, wait for an auction if you're looking for something that's maybe a little lower. But for me, Evil Ernie #1 is a book that I would be avoiding right now. I just think it still hasn't corrected enough. And a big part of that, like I talked about in the video, is the scarcity of the book. It just doesn't sell as much as some of these others, and so it's taken longer to correct. Next one there is Marvel Superhero Secret Wars #8. Big Venom key, first appearance of the symbiote, and like a lot of the other Venom keys, just got too hot. And you can see here with an 11% ROI, 18% downside risk, I think it just still has too much risk. It's going to take more than a year to get back to even, and so I would be avoiding that one right now. And the last one there is Swamp Thing #37. Similar to Marvel Secret Wars #8, 11% annual return, 18% downside, so more than a year. And now, yes, there could be something where James Gunn announces some big thing with Constantine and it spikes. That's always possible. That potentially changes how you view the book. But at least the way things are today, I think there's just too much risk for it, so I would avoid Swamp Thing #37. Now, the last ones that I'm going to talk about here are the ones that I would just watch. Now, part of that is if you find a great deal, go ahead, pick that book up. It's also that these are ones where the annual return will get you back to even within a year, which means if you decide to wait too long, if you get within a year, it's basically at the prices it was at today. And then you're just going to be paying the same price anyway. So it doesn't really matter. So with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1, that annual return of 15 to 20%, and that was over 15 years, long period of time. This book, even though it has a downside of 22 to 12%, that annual return will take care of that within a year. And so I think this is one where if you find one for a decent price, like say one comes up for sale an 8.5 for 14,000 or 13.5, the upper end of that estimate, that's a pretty reasonable price right now. Probably not a bad time to pick up that book if you're looking to spend, over $10,000 on a comic. Now, the next one here, Amazing Spider-Man 300. Unlike the other Venom keys, this one has actually gotten pretty close to where I think it should be today. It has an annual return of 12% and only a 6% downside. Talked about this as well. I just think this book sells so often that it's helped to get it back to that baseline price a little bit more quickly. And so this is one that if you find that decent price, I'm sure you could easily find this book around $700 if you just wait for the right auction. Like I said, it sells all the time. And so if you find that around there, very safe book to pick up right now. And then the last one is Hulk number 340. Again, very similar. It has an annual return of 14% and a downside risk of just 7%. Means in about 6 or 7 months, the approximate value of this book will already be at that $350 price point. And so to me, this is a very low risk book to buy right now and just watch and see if one happens to come up in that, around that estimated price, then be a safe book to be picking up. All right, so what are my conclusions from all of this information? Now, I've talked about this in my other top 10 videos as well, but I think it's important just to mention again that I think too many people take that all or nothing approach. It's either prices are too high and I'm not buying, or prices are too low and I'm buying everything. And so what I like to show here is that that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot more gray. It's not just black and white. Sometimes books are better to buy than others. Sometimes books have corrected more than others. Sometimes books have delayed going up more than others. And so there are always opportunities out there where some books are better to buy than others. And that's what I'm showing here within the Copper Age, that some definitely that I would be avoiding and some that I think are very safe to be picking up today. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this top 10 video, got some useful information, especially if you have been looking for some of those Copper Age key comics. There are definitely some out there that are potential buys right now, books that you might want to watch, but some that you also want to avoid still have some correcting to do after the big price spikes of the comic boom. Again, make sure to leave a comment, subscribe, like the video for a chance to win this giveaway book, X-Men number 7, second appearance of the Blob. And make sure to go check out the Fanalytics Instagram page as well and subscribe there. Sign up for the beta release of the Fanalytics website and get notifications about any other types of announcements that they have, giveaways that they might be doing, all that kind of great stuff. So again, thank you for watching this video and stay tuned for more content between my channel and the Fanalytics channel in the future.